Well, now joining me on the stage, we have to a rather different view of the future, one I think will be close to home for many of you out there in the audience. We're assessing the impact of massive increases in data, which of course has all kinds of implications for business, for commerce, for the way we live our lives, for the way we consume products. Welcoming me, joining me now on the stage, we have the two esteemed guests who will be talking about this. Please join me. Take a seat in either places here. We have Eric Openshaw, Vice Chairman and US Technology, Media and Telecommunications Leader at Deloitte. And we also have John Hagel III, Director and Co-Chair of the Deloitte Center for the Edge. John, perhaps you could explain to me a little bit more about what specifically that is before we enter the meditation upon the implications of big data.
The Center for the Edge is a research center that was set up about 6 years ago. It was actually Eric's brainchild. He came up with the idea and managed to somehow recruit me into Deloitte to actually start the center and run it. Basically, the charter for the center is identify emerging business opportunities that should be on the CEO's agenda but are not, and do the research required to persuade them to put it on the agenda. So it's a very broad canvas.
Now, increased fragmentation and concentration, we've got an oxymoron right there. Explain to me the challenges, how you see these specific challenges, fragmentation and concentration caused by massive increases in data.
It's a key question that we think, obviously, our frame of reference is much more dealing with the business world and corporate executives. But there's a lot of, obviously, great interest in big data and the value that it can create, the opportunities it creates. One of the areas that isn't talked about as much, which we think has profound implications, is just what are the structural implications of big data? To what extent is it going to lead to more fragmentation? There's one view of the world that says we're going into a world where everybody becomes an independent contractor. You basically are a free agent and companies are a figment of the past. And on the other side, you have another point of view that says actually, given network effects that are inherent in a lot of the big data platforms, you're going to see winner-take-all economy, where you see increasing concentration and consolidation. This is a huge issue. If you're a senior executive of a very large company, you would like to know whether you're in a world that's going to fragment or a world that's going to concentrate and what to do about it. And so it's attracted a lot of our attention and research. And essentially, we've come up with a perspective that says both of these are going to happen. They're going to happen in different parts of the economy and for different reasons. And again, if you're an executive, it's important to understand, are you in a part of the economy that's going to fragment, or are you in a part of the economy that's going to concentrate? Briefly, I think the perspective in terms of fragmentation is that we're likely to see the most fragmentation in essentially product innovation and commercialization businesses, coming up with new products, getting them into market, getting adoption. All of that, we believe, will fragment. You've seen early stages of it in digital media, for example, the fragmentation of the media business. We are going to see more and more of it in physical products, given the opportunities that are created by 3D printing platforms. Democratization of the means of production leads to fragmentation in the product space. On the other side, you're going to see a lot of concentration and consolidation. There's a huge need for infrastructure providers, whether it's traditional manufacturing infrastructure in cases where you can't do 3D printing on site, you still need scale factories, or in the case of digital platforms, the data centers that are embedded in the cloud are going to be highly concentrated and consolidated. So it's a question of what part of the economy are you focused on? Where are the opportunities? And that's, I think, the opening perspective that we have on that.
Eric, you a senior leader there at Deloitte. Does big data keep you awake at night?
Every night, on a variety of fronts. First and foremost, just from the securitization, because we are kind of a trusted entity and need to protect. But more importantly, as John mentioned, the disruptive opportunities associated with it. And we have different pieces and parts to the world of Deloitte. The regulated business, probably worry a little bit less about that disruption in the short run with big data, but in the non-regulated parts of our business, the non-audit parts of our business, we're already seeing fragmentation occur around the edges. Tools as interesting and that we all use, like LinkedIn, now providing a crowdsourced platform for high-end strategy work, and eroding away at certain parts of the market that just a few years ago that was supposed to be Deloitte and McKinsey and BCG, and now we see crowdsourcing a credible work product as well.
So where in the past you would have spent $1 million on some kind of research to establish an answer to a question, some cowboy out there is using internet tools to do the same work for a fraction of the price.
Yes and no. I think perhaps not at the same level and depth, but you get into this argument of, is it good enough to move forward? And if you can crowdsource a point of view for $10 or $15 or $20,000 that's good enough to build a business case, then you can move on to do all kinds of deeper dive primary research and then traditional secondary research, but maybe you don't have to spend $500,000 to get that first answer. You can spend 15 or 20 or 30.
John, give me a picture of companies, corporations, or sectors perhaps that you think might be most vulnerable to this brave new world.
Perhaps oversimplifying, I would say most large companies today are vulnerable. If you think about large companies across a variety of industries, the core mindset and culture and skill set, I would say, is still focused on product rules. The executives who run product make all the key decisions. They win the battles if there's a disagreement. And that's the culture. And yet that's the part of the economy that's going to fragment. And so if you're really a product company at scale, you better think long and hard about how you're going to maintain that scale in the face of big data platforms where you can coordinate activity much more freely and coordinate on a global scale to connect with others in smaller companies, smaller entities. And so I think as Eric said, it's a highly disruptive situation that we're in. There's a meme going around that big data is the new oil. And I think it's an interesting meme at one level, but I have profound issues with it in the sense that, first of all, oil is a depleting resource. Data is a renewable resource. Big oil is not disruptive. We've had it for a long time. I think this is hugely disruptive. I'd like to view big data as the new solar. It is a renewable source of highly disruptive value creation. And where ultimately the real win here, unlike, again, big oil, with big oil, it's who owns the oil. I think here it's a question of who can create the most value from this resource, from solar, from the solar energy that's abundant. And large companies, by and large, I mean, they brag about the number of terabytes they have in their data warehouses, and you talk to them about, well, what are you doing with all that data? And you get kind of, well, we're thinking about it, we're working on it. That's the gap. That's where you're going to see the huge instability in industry after industry. Just to pick a few industries, I mean, as I mentioned, media industry and tech industry and telecom have been kind of at the forefront of these disruptive forces. I think the next wave have to do with healthcare, financial services, and the energy business.
Well, we've even seen the example in the oil business. You might want to call that out about sharing the platform data and discovering oil.
Well, it actually more in the gold.
Gold
mining. There's this great example that was used that's been around for many years, Goldcorp, which basically at one point made a lot of its geological data publicly available and invited anybody to come in and analyze the data and come up with ideas as to what were the most promising areas to mine to get more gold productivity of their exploration activity. And they created a prize, basically, and awarded a prize and huge productivity benefit from that one-time contest. The interesting question is, what happens if you made that more than a one-time event? What if you created a data platform with this geological data and on an ongoing basis invited continuing analysis of that data to continue to find new and improved areas to mine? That's a totally different mindset that most companies, again, have a very hard time getting their mind around. Data is proprietary. Data ought to be protected, needs to be protected. And yet, if you believe that ultimately the value accrues to those who can extract the most value from the data, then you better find ways to invite as many people as possible in to extract that value with you.
Eric, talk to me about your meditations on as you say, the protection of data, which is, of course, the security issue, IP security, a huge question which returns, I guess, every year here at FiRe, but also the dissemination of that information, that data, how a company can best use data to, if you like, project itself.
Okay, fair enough. Well, a couple things come to mind. First and foremost, around the data, kind of tagging on what John said, we're not at all convinced that the best data is the data that you own by a long shot, and nor is it necessarily the most useful on a look-forward basis. We now know through a very good, sophisticated analytics that we can do things like predict bank failures within 30 or so days with just publicly available information. And so back to this issue of we could protect all of that inside the four walls of an institution and let no one know what is kind of going on. But if there's enough other pointers out there outside of the organization, maybe it doesn't matter quite so much. And I've had this running debate, and this is not a Deloitte point of view, this is just Eric's point of view, because I'm not an auditor. But I have an ongoing debate with my colleagues about the value of, ultimately, of an audit protecting the financial markets. And is it more important to know that last year the numbers were good, or is it more important to know that next year we'll be in business? And if the data on the outside tells us that that's where we'll find out if we're still in business next year, that might be the more important place to go digging.
Just to add on that, I think a lot of this ultimately from our perspective hinges on mindsets and assumptions about where's the value and how to capture the value. One of the things that's interesting to us when we talk to large companies about big data is often the discussion is around, well, how can we take this data and hand it to our senior executives to give them a better view of the business and be more effective in the decision making around the business? Our sense is one of the biggest opportunities, and it's largely a missed opportunity, is how do you take that data and feed it back to the frontline workers in ways that allow them in real time to improve their performance based on feedback? And we've gone fairly far afield in trying to understand the potential for some of this, but we're very intrigued, for example, with online gaming and World of Warcraft as an example, where each player has their own dashboard, and they can construct their dashboard based on what they think is important to their task or their challenge. And so creating that real-time feedback loop down into the front line is a huge opportunity, but it's largely untapped. Now, there's one company that's a very interesting example of this. They're a startup in Silicon Valley that run call center operations for larger corporations. They brag that they're a call center operation without any call center because they don't have a physical facility. A call center is a physical facility. They employ roughly 20,000 independent contractors who work from their home. And they've created a very sophisticated technology platform that allows all these people to be connected. But one of the key things they've done, because it is a distributed workforce, is be very thoughtful about how do we create that feedback loop back to the frontline call center operator so that they can see in real time how they're doing, what they could do in terms of handling that next call to up the performance. It's been a huge driver of performance improvement, yet very rare in a corporate environment.
I have the idea that plenty of you guys out there would perhaps like to raise questions on the questions of big data, the idea of fragmentation and so on. If anybody wants to raise a hand and let us know, there are a couple of microphones out there which are available for you to speak. There is somebody over there. Sorry, I missed you initially. Would you like to step up to the microphone, introduce yourself, and put the question to our guests here? Yep, do we have the microphones on, please?
All right.
Yep, we can hear you.
You were speaking about the value of data, but it sounded to me like you were also describing that the value is really in the insights of the data. So it seems like the next logical connection is really what's valuable is the algorithms that people are going to use to go get information from data. I guess what I'm curious about is how do you see that? That to me feels like a very different culture in business, which is to start thinking about algorithms as assets in business and what you would do with it over time.
It's a great point. I think from our perspective, a lot of the value is in those algorithms, the ability to extract insight from the data. But I'd say even more than that, it's beyond the algorithm because it goes back to this question of feedback loops. Who gets the benefit of the insight from those algorithms? How do we learn faster as we act on those algorithms, act on the insight, and learn, well, wait a minute, this really worked, but that action didn't work, and refine rapidly over time. Ultimately, I think one of our key themes in the work we do is that we're moving to an institutional environment where it's all about accelerated learning, that the real strategic advantage going forward is how fast can you learn? How fast can you take whatever data you have and rapidly learn from it and refine? And I think in that context, I'll make another point which may be a bit off topic relative to big data because we all think about these large databases sitting out in cyberspace. If we're really focused on learning, one of the most valuable pieces of learning is around tacit knowledge. It's not the formal data that's captured in databases that we can access online. It's that knowledge that's in our head. And the real power is how do we combine that formal data with the tacit knowledge that's in our head in collaborative environments where we're challenging each other to learn faster and faster around that data.
Roger.
Yes. Is this on? Oh, yes, it is.
Yeah, it is.
I'm fascinated by the idea of a reward for somebody who participates in this sort of effort of being a prize. But that's winner take all. What if you, instead of that, had some sort of method of giving a percentage of gross to each person who came in? Let's say you took the lowest 1% of gross from any of these ideas and you divided it into, 5,000 parts. And you made each person who had made a contribution to that receive 1, 2, or 3 such parts. In that way, you would encourage people to get involved in all kinds of problems, not just their own particular area. And in that way, you, I should think, would be able to move things forward in this wonderful way you're suggesting.
It's a great notion. I think one of the questions, some of the examples we've looked at of potential models go back in part to China. For those of you who might be familiar in the motorcycle industry, there's some very interesting examples of entrepreneurial Chinese companies that have taken on the Japanese competitors. And one of the things they've done is create a large network or ecosystem of designers who participate around the design of a new motorcycle generation. But they have created a rhythm of every 6 months they're going to release a new design of a motorcycle. And if you win and get to participate in that release, you've got some rewards because you're going to be selected as one of the key suppliers in that motorcycle. But every 6 months, it reopens again. So not to lose faith, if you lose that first round of competition, you're in the next one. And so it's a very interesting way to foster both competition and collaboration. Another example of this closer to home, it's a company that virtually nobody here in the US remembers or even knew to begin with, but it's called Portal Player. And for those of you who know, it was actually instrumental in the early development of digital music players. And they had exactly that same model. Every 6 months, a new release of a digital music player, tapping into a global ecosystem of participants and challenging them every 6 months who can come up with the best component design to get into that new release.
Yes, please.
Can you speak to the conflicts that arise around algorithmic big data, specifically internal politics of decisions? You know, you say I have an experienced older staff member that wants to make it based on their tacit knowledge versus an algorithm that the company is starting to trust more and more. How are companies resolving those conflicts?
Eric?
Okay. Well, there's a couple things. One is as the data becomes more available to everyone, that this democratization, we see more and more power shifting to the individual and becoming essentially consumer-centric and creator-centric and disrupting organizations that tend to depend on, I'm the leader, I want it this way, because the data often doesn't support the intuition anymore.
It's interesting. There's almost a pincer movement on the corporation between, on the one hand, I'd say that the entities or the people who have figured out how to use big data best, I mean, not to say they've cracked it by any means, but are all of us as customers. We're taking advantage of big data in various forms to get more value at lower cost from the companies we deal with. And then on the other side, talent, creative talent. I mean, one of the things we've looked at is over time, cash compensation to creative talent has gone way up. And it's in part because creative talent has more visibility about options available to them through various kinds of big data platforms that they never had in the past. And so the poor company is caught in the middle. More powerful customers on the one side pulling value out, more powerful talent on the other side pulling value out, and the company caught in the middle with a lot of the politics and mindset issues that you framed there in terms of how do we actually harness the value of this data to create and capture more of this value over time.
So I think the outcome then is a slow, of large enterprises, a slow delayering of the enterprise. As you look at structures break down because the information flow doesn't necessarily need to be through the pyramid and controlled in that military command style. Everybody's already got all the information, so we now see a hierarchy structure that is player-coach, a lot flatter.
But I will also say that, I mean, part of the reason this is such a challenge for companies is that old adage, information is power. And as you suggested, the power base hinges on information that's unique to me, not available to others. And so there's going to be huge resistance from those who are in power in companies to changing the way they do business. And I think this whole notion of organizational transformation, we can frame at a high level the imperative of delayering. But you walk into a large company and talk about delayering, the antibodies mount very quickly. And they are extraordinarily powerful. And if you're not careful, they will kill you. And in fact, the track record is most of the time the antibodies win.
But it's really good for our business because we do a lot of that. So we're okay with that.
Yes, please.
I'm Stephen Sprague from Wave Systems. So as we move towards greater automation with big data of decision processor information, there comes the classic case of the thumb on the scale. And the assurance and integrity that the big data that's actually collected is real starts to have enormous implications. And today we have very little integrity information associated with the big data sources that we collect. And if all of a sudden you're making billion-dollar decisions one way or the other, the hack can be almost invisible because you just hack the actual data. And there's so many great examples in history where, you know, there's the map that doesn't show Area 51, but it's supposed to be the official map. You know, there are so many different contexts of how this has been done in past, and yet somehow we go, as usual, running in, full headlong in, and there's almost no conscious thought to security in the process.
Is there a risk that as big data becomes bigger and bigger, we forget that we have to figure out whether we can trust it?
Well, I think that's always been the case with any size set of data we've had, and getting. But I think if I looked at the glass half full, I'd say that we now have the opportunity not to rely on 2 or 3 map makers, but we have the opportunity to rely on Google Earth and a lot of planes that fly over every day, and people that are out on their dune buggies on Saturday tweeting stuff because they can get a signal. So I think we can begin to actually see a place where the data is probably more trusted because it's coming from more sources, and we can mash it up and we can start to look for the anomalies.
I think it also means this is one of the areas where over time we do see huge potential for concentration and consolidation. The whole arena of data data aggregators and platforms for aggregation of data that not only provide access in the form of APIs and standards, but help to have protocols and processes to ensure the integrity of the data, and also policy engines that can help manage the availability of this data under specified conditions. I think it came up in some of the prior conversations. There are big issues around proprietary data, around privacy, all of those. Under what conditions is this data going to be available from this aggregation platform? That's a big issue, only starting to touch on it in terms of the techniques and ways to do this, but going to be absolutely critical if we're going to convince more and more people to contribute data, more and more companies to contribute data to these aggregation platforms.
So it should end up being a massively large business, just that portion that looks at certification and validation and assuredness that if we say this data is private, it's being kept private. In my own world, I've pleaded with my own firm to get in that business because I think that would dwarf everything else Deloitte does. And at $35 billion a year, that's be a big number. So,
final thought: are you concerned by the disruptive implications of this journey, this process? Because is it simply, Darwinian survival of the fittest that we're looking at now, or is it actually going to be so disruptive that the ecosystems of various industries is going to be set back, overwhelmed in a way that's actually going to be negative for everybody? Is there a risk of that?
Huge risk. I mean, I would say one of the biggest wild cards here is public policy. I was just posted on Twitter this morning. New York City has ruled that Airbnb is an illegal operation. And that's just the beginning. I mean, the mobilization of incumbents to use public policy to drive out new entrants who are using big data. Airbnb could not exist without big data. This whole notion of collaborative consumption and how we get more usage of various kinds of assets and products that we use as consumers is critically dependent on a public policy regime that allows these companies to actually use this data. And again, my biggest fear is that those antibodies are very strong both within companies, and I would expect many of the large incumbents to be very active in Washington, wherever there's a public policy center, to make the case for why they need to be protected from this unfair competition.
Eric, final thought from you on that question?
Well, I think it's, to John's point, I think it's highly disruptive. We've been talking for years about the topple rate of the S&P 500 and how it continues to go this way. This is just more evidence and more fuel to that fire. That isn't going to stop anytime soon. We can travel, as we both travel around and look at companies all over the world, we see the stress fractures of what's going on and the scratching in the head of disbelief around this, and the speed at which companies can be replicated for not a lot. And John and I sat with a very large tech company at CES, global tech, very large. And they talked about how when they were disrupting Japan, how hard it was to replicate and re-engineer analog systems. and that digitization had ruined their lives because everything they did was being replicated in days. In other countries we like to talk about all the time. And sort of the story of no honor among thieves, I guess. But the availability of the data and the ability to disrupt is just extraordinary.
Just one other quick comment too. I don't think we've talked much about it yet, but I think it's an extremely important implication of big data and the analytics that are associated with big data is I believe it's going to just intensify and accelerate the urbanization of the world, the movement into cities on two levels. One is I think big data and the analytics associated with it create much more efficient infrastructures at scale for cities. So you have much more efficient infrastructures to support a city. But also cities, if you believe learning is going to be the key to success and accelerated learning, sustained accelerated learning, cities are the place where you get that ability to connect to tacit knowledge in ways that are much richer than you ever could just being online and connected from wherever you are. So I would see cities as becoming more and more central as engines of growth and disruption.
That's terrific. Thank you very much. My guests, again, John Hagel III and Eric Openshaw, both of Deloitte. You have a break now, everybody. So you can go and feed and caffeinate yourselves, and we'll be back in 20 minutes. Thanks very much.